Hello and welcome to the Swedish Skeptics in the Pub online. So this is something that we do today. Today we usually do this in Swedish, but today we're going to do it in English. I hope we have a lot of English speaking listeners with us as well. We usually do this we try to do it once a month or so, but we've done it 10 times over the last year. The origin of Skeptics in the Pub is that we used to meet in an actual pub, and we invited some interesting presenter, and we had that person give us a good speech, etc. We had some beer or some coffee or whatever, and then we take a little break, and then we could ask questions. And this is how it will work today as well. It's just we will do it online, and you have to supply your own beverages, I'm afraid. I will soon introduce our guests for tonight, but first a little bit of how it works. Of course, you will see them giving their speech here at Twitch. You can use the chat. There is a chat functionality in Twitch. You can use that if you want to. Just remember to be respectful and don't spam us with unnecessary things. And we do have if somebody from the outside should crash the party here, we do have a moderator who monitors what's happening in the chat. But feel free to use it in a constructive and good way. Apart from that, below me in the picture here, you will see, or rather there, there is a link to something called Slido. So sli.do/VOF. And VOF, it's the Swedish Skeptics, right? So at Slido/VOF, you can put in questions to the speakers. And you can do it, you can start already now if you want to. But you can do it during the speech, during the talk, and also during the break that we will have after maybe about an hour. We'll have a break, and then you can put even more questions. Even if you don't have a question, it's a good idea to go in there because you can vote on good questions. So questions that other people have put in and you want answered, you just give them a like, and then they will go upwards in the list there, and it has a bigger chance of getting answered. So that's that from the technicality. So it's high time now to with a magic push of the button here, you will see tonight's stars. It is Claus Larsen at the top in the page on the picture here, and Sten Svanholm. And I have already talked too much, so I will quietly fade away and leave it to them. Claus and Steen, please start.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Pontus, and thank you for having us. Claus and I are on a script today that will make it easier to pass a lot of information on to you. But it will also sound like we read aloud from something, because that's what we're doing. As Pontus mentioned, my name is Sten Svanholm, and I'm a teacher, I'm a musician, and I'm an author. And
my name is Claus Larsen.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Claus Larsen, and I have a background in information technology. Sten and I are also members of Skeptica.dk, the network of independent Danish skeptics. We deal critically and scientifically with the supernatural, the paranormal, the miraculous, and also conspiracy theories. At the time of the attack, I was living in New York.
Don't worry, this will be just about the only bullet list today. So first, a little bit about ourselves, then we'll go through the key points of the plan and the attack on 9/11, how the authorities responded, how Claus experienced the attack, and what the investigations found. We'll also give examples of a few of the many conspiracy theories concerning the attack and the following catastrophe. We round off with a very quick overview of how we approach the subject of conspiracy theories and those who believe in them. There will, of course, be time for Q&A. Claus and I have created the website 911facts.dk, where we investigate the many conspiracy theories concerning the terror attack on September 11, 2001. We have investigated about 100 claims, each with their own article, and the articles are available in Danish and in English. The articles are also incredibly effective in debates because conspiracy theorists focus on questions they feel haven't been answered. So we simply refer to the relevant article and inform the conspiracy theorist that now your question has been answered. We also have some fact sheets, articles with a broader scope, and a collection of all available documentation regarding 9/11. You can find more than 3 terabytes on our site, making it one of the biggest, if not the biggest of its kind in the world, and certainly the best, we think. So there's a lot of information coming your way today, but don't worry if you don't catch it all. As a teacher, I usually say that if students remember 20 or 25% of the lecture, then it should be considered a success. And besides, you can always rewatch this presentation later on.
20 years have passed since the terror attack. It has gone from current event to become history. So what happened? This is the condensed version. Osama bin Laden was born in 1957 into a wealthy Saudi Arabian family. His father had built a business empire in construction with close ties to the Saudi Arabian government. However, a life in the capitalist world was not for Osama. He broke early with his family, focusing on a life of religion. He did not become an Islamic scholar, but chose a much more individualized approach to Islam, where every Muslim should interpret the Holy Scriptures himself. Do your own research, so to speak. This led Osama bin Laden to a path of extreme fundamentalism, forming his terror group Al-Qaeda in 1998. In 1994, he lost his Saudi citizenship and was kicked out of the country for criticizing the regime for letting American troops use Saudi territory during and after the First Gulf War. In 1996, Osama bin Laden declared war against the United States of America. His message was clear: all Americans were now targets, be they military or civilians. Several terror attacks followed, most notably the bomb attacks on American embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya, both on August 7, 1998. This earned Osama bin Laden a place on the FBI's 10 most wanted list in 1999. In 2000, Al-Qaeda carried out another attack, this time targeting an American destroyer, the USS Cole. There was no doubt that Osama bin Laden, using his Al-Qaeda network, was dead serious about his declaration of war. The question was, when and where would he strike next? A plan to attack the United States on its own turf was formed slowly in the years between 1998 and 2001. Various plans were considered, but ultimately it was decided to use commercial planes as missiles, hitting targets in the US. This turned out to be remarkably simple. No fancy technology was needed, only the will to carry out the attack with the intention of dying in the process. Suicide pilots were needed, as well as terrorists keeping the crew and passengers under control. 19 members of Al-Qaeda were finally selected, with 4 having undergone sufficient training as pilots, mostly within the United States. The terrorists formed a series of dry runs where they traveled by plane, observing how the crew handled the passengers and how best to take control of the cockpits.
At last, everything was in place. All that was needed was a date. The following will be based on the numerous reports, studies, and data obtained from the flight data recorders, the cockpit voice recorders, and radar. It will also be based on news reports, witness accounts, and physical evidence. The attack unfolds in the northeastern sector of the United States. We will follow each plane from takeoff to its final destination. American Airlines Flight 11 takes off from Logan International Airport, Boston, Massachusetts. On board are 11 crew members and 81 passengers. The plane is heading for Los Angeles, California. Boston Center instructs Flight 11 to turn 20 degrees to the right. The crew acknowledges and the plane turns accordingly. And you can follow the clock down on the left of your screen, see what progresses. 18 seconds later, Boston Center instructs Flight 11 to climb to and maintain 35,000 feet. This is never acknowledged, which causes Boston Center to attempt numerous times to contact the plane. Shortly after, 5 of the passengers take control of Flight 11, and those 5 passengers are, of course, the terrorists, by first killing 2 flight attendants and a passenger. The terrorists are Mohammed Atta, who will pilot the plane, Abdulaziz Al-Omari, Wael al-Sheikhi, Walid al-Sheikhi, and Satam al-Suqami. It's not known how the hijackers gained access to the cockpits. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, which is in charge of handling and regulating the civilian airspace over the United States, required that the doors remain closed and locked during flight. But this rule was not always followed. And even in the event of a locked cockpit door, there would still be a cockpit key kept by one of the flight attendants. The hijackers then sprayed a substance, possibly mace or pepper spray, to move the passengers to the rear of the plane. They also claimed that they had a bomb. Radar data shows at 8:16 that Flight 11 levels off at 29,000 feet. 3 minutes later, flight attendant Betty Ong makes a 25-minute-long telephone call via an airphone, informing American Airlines Reservation Center that Flight 11 has been hijacked and that 2 flight attendants have been killed. A few minutes after, Mohammed Atta switches off the transponder. This means that the air traffic control can no longer follow the plane by its identification number on their monitors or receive information about the plane's altitude. If a plane's transponder is off, it becomes difficult, not impossible, but difficult to follow the plane on radar, as there are many planes in the area at the same time. The American Airlines employee who received Betty Ong's call contacts a supervisor who instructs a dispatcher to try and contact the cockpit. However, there's no answer from the cockpit. This tells American Airlines that the plane has probably been hijacked. At 8:24, Mohammed Atta makes an announcement that the plane has been hijacked. The announcement is actually intended for the passengers to calm them down, but he accidentally sends the message to the air traffic control in Boston instead. A few minutes later, Flight 11 changes course and heads south following the Hudson River. Again, a little later, Mohammed Atta makes another announcement, also intended for the passengers, but again sends it to air traffic control in Boston. In the next 5 minutes, Flight 11 makes several changes in altitude. At 8:37, from an altitude of 29,000 feet, Flight 11 begins to descend at 3,200 feet per minute, far exceeding the normal descent. Again, a little later, at 10,000 feet, Flight 11 makes a left turn, heading directly for the World Trade Center. Then flight attendant Amy Sweeney is on the airphone talking to American Airlines Flight Service. At one point, she looks out the window and reports that the plane is in rapid descent and that there are buildings. Amy Sweeney then says that they are flying way too low. The call ends abruptly. At 8:47, a team of French filmmakers are following the New York Fire Department, documenting their daily routine. They suddenly hear the sound of a big airplane, something highly unusual in Manhattan, as commercial flight is forbidden to overfly the island at a low altitude. The cameraman manages to film Flight 11 as it rams straight into World Trade Center 1, also called the North Tower, at an estimated speed of 790 kilometers per hour. Everyone on board dies instantly. An unknown number of people in the building also dies. The plane buries itself in the building, severing all 3 main staircases, which makes it impossible for anyone above impact to escape.
United Airlines Flight 175 takes off from Logan International Airport, Boston, Massachusetts. On board are 9 crew members and 56 passengers. The plane is heading for Los Angeles, California. Flight 175 reaches its assigned cruise altitude of 31,000 feet. Flight 175 is instructed to turn right to avoid southbound traffic and American Airlines 767. The plane they are avoiding is the hijacked Flight 11. Flight 175 makes its final radio transmission. 5 of the passengers take control of Flight 175. The terrorists are Marwan al-Shiri, who will pilot the plane, Hamza al-Ghamdi, Mohand al-Shiri, Fayez Bani Hamad, and Ahmed al-Ghamdi. Marwan al-Shiri switches off the transponder. As is the case with Flight 11, air traffic control can no longer follow the plane by its identification or altitude. Flight 175 changes beacon codes twice within a 1-minute period. Flight 175 changes altitude. A passenger, Peter Hansen, calls his father, informing him that the plane has been hijacked and that people on board have been killed. This is confirmed by a flight assistant calling United Airlines. Air traffic control at FAA's New York Center tries to contact Flight 175 several times. There is no response. The plane turns southeast, climbing to 33,000 feet. Flight 175 turns northeast towards New York, staying at an altitude of 28,500 feet. A passenger, Brian Sweeney, leaves a phone message for his wife, telling her that his plane has been hijacked. A minute later, Peter Hansen calls his father again, saying that the hijackers have a bomb and that the plane might be crashed into a building. Flight 175 has reached New York. The plane is last spotted on radar as its altitude is now too low. By now, numerous cameras are pointed at the towers, capturing the harrowing sight of the approaching plane. Flight 175 hits World Trade Center 2, also called the South Tower, at an estimated speed of 950 kilometers per hour. Everyone on board dies instantly. An unknown number of people in the building also dies. Plane parts exit the building, scattering over a wide area. There are now millions watching, either on television or in the streets, aware that an attack is underway on a scale hitherto unseen. The question is now, what, if anything, comes next?
The third plane that day is American Airlines Flight 77. It takes off from Dulles Airport, Washington, D.C. On board are 6 crew members and 38 passengers. The plane is heading for Los Angeles, California. Flight 77 reaches its assigned cruising altitude, 35,000 feet. 5 of the passengers at 8:50 takes control of Flight 77. The terrorists are Hani Hanjour, who will pilot the plane, Nawaf al-Hamsi, Salam al-Hamsi, Mahed Moket, and Khalid al-Midha. 5 minutes later, Flight 77 deviates from the assigned course, turning south. And shortly after, Hani Hanjour switches off the transponder, as in the other planes. And as with Flight 11 and Flight 75, air traffic control can no longer follow the plane by its identification or altitude. Radar control also loses track of the plane because the plane is believed to be heading west, when in reality it has turned and is now heading due east. The plane is thus undetected for 36 minutes. Air traffic control at FAA Indianapolis Center tries to contact Flight 77 several times, but there's no response. At 9 o'clock sharp, Flight 77 is heading east and starts to descend from an altitude of 35,000 feet. The autopilot is engaged during this maneuver. A little later, Flight 77 levels off at 25,000 feet and makes a slight course change to northeast. And after that, the autopilot is disconnected for approximately 3 minutes, during which the plane changes altitude to 22,000 feet and back to 25,250 feet. So they are maneuvering a little around here, just to check out how the plane functions. At 9:22, Flight 77 descends for the next 7 minutes on autopilot, reaching an altitude of 7,000 feet. And 7 minutes later, the autopilot is disconnected. Flight 77 makes slight course changes and changes altitude, ranging from 6,800 feet and 8,000 feet. At 9:36, Flight 77 has reached Washington, D.C. and starts a 330-degree right turn from an altitude of 2,000 feet. Over the next 30 seconds, it accelerates to 850 kilometers per hour. And at 9:37, Flight 77 hits the Pentagon, which is the headquarters of the United States military. Everyone on board dies instantly, and 125 people inside the building also die. The impact is captured on surveillance cameras. Debris from the plane is buried inside the building and on the front lawn.
United Airlines Flight 93 takes off from Newark International Airport, New Jersey. On board are 7 crew members and 37 passengers. The plane is 40 minutes late. The plane is heading for San Francisco, California. Flight 93 reaches its assigned cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. 4 of the passengers take control of Flight 93. The terrorists are Ziad Jarrah, who will pilot the plane, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Nami, and Ahmed Al-Hasnawi. The words, "Get out of here," and sounds of struggle is recorded on the air traffic control radio at FAA's Cleveland Center. Ziad Jarrah makes an announcement to the passengers that the plane has been hijacked. Flight 93 climbs from 25,000 feet and begins a left 120 degrees turn to the southeast, maintaining an altitude of 41,000 feet for 2 minutes. It then starts descending at a rate of 4,000 feet per minute. Ziad Jarrah makes another announcement to the passengers. Around this time, some of the passengers have received information via phone calls that 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center 1 and 2. And the passengers realize that Flight 93 will also be used for a suicide attack. Transponder is turned off. Flight 93 climbs from 19,000 feet to 20,500 feet before continuing descending. At this point, some of the passengers begin to revolt. Their goal is to regain control of the plane by first eliminating the 2 hijackers in the passenger area and then seeking to gain entry to the cockpit. Flight 93 is at an altitude of 5,000 feet. For the next 2 minutes, Ziad Jarrah tries to prevent the passengers from gaining entry by making the plane perform violent maneuvers. This results in 30 degrees rolls to the left and right. The plane also pitches nose up and nose down aggressively. This causes the plane to climb to 10,000 feet while turning right. At 10:03, the passengers succeed in gaining access to the cockpit. Ziad Jarrah decides to crash the plane by turning it upside down and ramming it into the ground. Flight 93 hits the ground at a speed of about 900 kilometers per hour outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This causes the plane to bury itself deep into the ground while being splintered. The crash is captured on photo by Val McClatchy, who lives nearby. The impact leaves a crater of almost 3 meters deep and 12 meters wide. The red circle shows a human for size.
In New York, the true horror is yet to come. As the 2 planes hit the World Trade Center 1 and 2, they cause vast destruction and start fires on multiple floors. Here's an overview of the World Trade Center complex that consisted of 7 buildings. And here, an overview of the damage that the planes caused. While the New York Fire Department is quickly on the scene, they can do little with regards to the fires. As the minutes pass, reports come in about loud creaking from the structures of both buildings. It's also observed that both buildings are swaying. It's clear to many, including firefighters, that the buildings are in grave danger of collapsing. At 9:59, although the World Trade Center 2 has been hit last, it collapses first due to Flight 175 hitting it lower than Flight 11 has hit World Trade Center 1 and closer to the corner. This puts tremendous stress on the supporting beams and weakens the structure. At 9:59, World Trade Center 2 collapses 56 minutes after impact. Huge chunks of debris fall on the adjacent buildings. Dust clouds form, burying downtown Manhattan. World Trade Center 1 collapses at 10:28, 102 minutes after the impact. Again, downtown Manhattan is covered in clouds. Note the tall building in the lower right corner. This is World Trade Center 7. New York City is now a battlefield. The rescue effort has begun when Flight 11 hit World Trade Center 1, and it continues throughout the day. The collapse of World Trade Center 1 causes debris to hit World Trade Center 7 that we mentioned before. The debris causes fires to start on several floors. It's decided to let the building burn on its own since it has been evacuated. The fire crews have more than enough to do looking for survivors in the rubble of the Twin Towers. After burning for 7 hours, World Trade Center 7 collapses at 17:20. The floors lie piled up on top of each other. All of the 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex have now been completely destroyed. The destruction is almost impossible to comprehend. In Washington, D.C., the fires burned for several hours. Later in the day, damages to the Pentagon causes part of the building to collapse. This shows the crater where Flight 93 was crashed in Pennsylvania. Just have to move to the picture right here. Forensic experts and the police are conducting the criminal investigation. The impact is so destructive that the largest part of a human body found will be part of a spinal bone. Debris from the plane is found scattered over a large area.
The terror attack of September 11, 2001 is a fantastic success from the terrorists' point of view. The most powerful nation on earth, the United States of America, has been hit by not one but 4 coordinated attacks, leaving the financial center in New York in ruins. The military headquarters has been hit, and a 4th plane was intended for either the White House or the Capitol, seat of the Parliament. The death toll is devastating. Almost 3,000 people have died and 25,000 people are injured. After the attack, and in particular the catastrophic situation in New York, Americans wanted answers. What happened? How could it happen? The American Congress set up a national commission to investigate and present a full account of what happened. The investigation was based on interviews and testimonies from more than 1,200 individuals and more than 2 million pages of documentation from the relevant government bodies, such as the intelligence communities, the FBI, and the FAA. The final report concluded that the CIA and the FBI had failed to potentially prevent the attack due to a lack of interdepartmental communication and precautions that turned out to be insufficient in meeting the actual threat. The report also made a series of recommendations in order to prevent a similar attack in the future. 2 reports on the intelligence communities were particularly scathing. The question why the World Trade Center was so heavily impacted by the catastrophic developments following the planes hitting the Twin Towers was addressed in several reports. The first came from FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which performed a preliminary report on the damages. This report was not seen as sufficient, which resulted in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, being charged with investigating the catastrophe in greater detail. It must be said that, as such reports go, the NIST reports are a hallmark of clear communication. Although highly technical, they are readily understood by most people. As for the planes and the hijackings, the National Transportation Safety Board performed extensive investigations of each of the planes. The terror attack is thus perhaps the most documented event in modern history. More than 40,000 pages, 130,000 photos, or almost 800 hours of video, and almost 3,500 hours of audio are available on our site, 9/11 Facts DK. The attack itself was heavily covered by the media, with cameras capturing most of the attack in live broadcasts. The printed press covered the attack and catastrophe in detail for years after. There's a whole industry in publishing dedicated to the attack, and numerous documentaries have been made covering these different aspects. The newest one, Turning Point, which you can see down here, is currently available on Netflix. It's really highly recommended. And of course, Al-Qaeda has admitted to planning and carrying out the attack.
We have plucked out a specific question in order to illustrate how things could go so wrong. Why weren't the hijacked planes not stopped before they reached their targets, at least when it comes to Flight 11, Flight 175, and Flight 77? It's not a comforting answer. We must first understand how the system was supposed to work. There are 4 key players. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, is in charge of handling and regulating the civilian airspace over the United States. In the event of a hijacking, it's the responsibility of the FAA to request military assistance if the FAA deems it necessary. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, is an American and Canadian joint organization. Up until 9/11, NORAD's primary goal was to defend US airspace, primarily from threats coming from the Soviet Union and later Russia. The Pentagon is the headquarters of the United States Armed Forces. The National Military Command Center, NMCC, is the communications center. The main organization is the Department of Defense. After the Cold War had ended, the threat from Soviet bombers diminished significantly. The dominant threat was thus seen as cruise missiles coming from foreign airspace into American airspace. Other threats were terrorists' use of aircraft as weapons, mainly as carriers of weapons of mass destruction. Terrorists using commercial aircraft as guided missiles in suicide missions was not recognized as a threat. The diminishing threat of war had led to a reduction in airspace surveillance. At the time of the attack, there were only 7 sites across the United States, each with 2 fighter jets, 14 in all, ready to be deployed in case of hijackings. In case of a hijacking, the FAA would request military support from NORAD. However, this required multiple levels of notification and approval at the highest level of government. Such support would consist of fighter jets being scrambled and placed in an observatory position behind the hijacked plane. This was due to the standard operating procedure concerning hijackings. Establish contact with the hijackers to hear their demands and avoid escalating the situation. Hijackings were seen as hostage situations, not a suicide mission. FAA protocols for hijackings involved the pilot notifying the controller via radio or so-called squawk code, a transponder code of 7500 for hijacking. Controllers would then inform their supervisors, who would inform management up the hierarchy to FAA headquarters. If a hijacking was confirmed, the designated hijack coordinator would then contact the National Military Command Center, NMCC, at the Pentagon, asking for military escort aircraft. The NMCC would then seek approval from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Only then would permission be passed down the hierarchy to scramble escort aircraft. Once the hijacked plane had been located by the escort aircraft would then report back about unusual activities or aid search and rescue in case of an emergency such as a crash. And this would necessitate that the plane did not try to hide where it was going. The protocols did not include an intercept, meaning that a jet fighter would engage the hijacked plane. Prior to 9/11, only the president or the vice president could order a shoot down of a commercial aircraft. There were 3 presumptions about a hijacked plane. The hijacked plane would be easy to identify, and since hijackings were considered hostage situations, the plane would not be assumed to attempt to disappear. 2. There would be time to communicate between the FAA and the Norad chain of commands. 3. The hijacking would take the usual form. The hijackers would make it known that a hijacking had occurred, land the plane, and start negotiations. None of these 3 presumptions were fulfilled on 9/11. Dealing with the 4 planes as hijackings only helped the terrorists carry out their suicide mission. The answer to our question is devastatingly brutal. There was simply not enough time. If we look at the key events of the attack, we see that the attack itself lasts only 109 minutes. If we look at the planes, it becomes even more clear just how quickly events unfolded. Only 32 minutes passed between the hijacking of Flight 11 and the plane hitting the World Trade Center 1. For Flight 175, it takes 25 minutes between hijacking and the plane hitting World Trade Center 2. And for Flight 77, it takes 46 minutes between hijacking and the plane hitting the Pentagon. For Flight 93, it takes 35 minutes between hijacking and crash. And these events are overlapping. Never before had 4 planes been hijacked simultaneously. There was not enough time to stop the attack once it had begun.
Millions of people had watched the attack on television as it unfolded. Many thousands experienced it, primarily in New York City, and I was one of them. Now, I have several versions of what I experienced. There's the version that I can share with anyone. That's the one you're going to get. Then there's the version I can share with those who experienced it with me. And then there's the version I cannot share with anyone outside a very small group. At least not yet. It's simply too gruesome. But maybe someday. At the time of the attack, I was living with my then wife in Queens, one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. She had taken the subway to work in Manhattan while I was working from home that day. Unlike Americans, I hadn't turned on the television when I woke. I'd first eaten breakfast and checked my email and fed the cats. And only then, when it was almost 9 o'clock, I turned on the television to catch the morning news. CNN popped up, showing the World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, with smoke billowing out. And I immediately understood that it must have been an airplane that hit the tower, because the south tip of Manhattan, where the towers were, is roughly between the 3 major airports in the area, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. It's not inconceivable that a plane had hit the building, even if it was on a clear morning, little to no wind, sunny, as you only find in New York City in the autumn. Everyone understood that this is a catastrophe, and everyone considered it a dreadful accident. And then, watching the towers, I saw another plane approaching. Suddenly, an enormous explosion emerged from the other tower, World Trade Center 2, the South Tower. And at that moment, we realized that we were under attack. These were not accidents. This was a terror attack of a colossal magnitude. From then on, all media were covering the story for what it was, an attack. And news stories began to flood in, all dreadful. The American military headquarters, the Pentagon, was reported hit by something, presumably a 3rd plane, maybe even a bomb. Other planes were reported hijacked. We didn't know which stories were true and which were false. Some stories were later retracted, others confirmed. Others were neither confirmed or retracted throughout the day. Witnesses were interviewed. People who had seen the first plane hit the North Tower and the second plane hit the South Tower. Then the cameras zoomed in on the burning and smoking towers, and we could see people clinging to the facades of the buildings. They couldn't escape. Then reports of objects falling from the towers. For a few minutes, the cameras tried to follow the objects until the TV stations realized that the objects were humans jumping from the towers. The cameras zoomed out so that no details could be seen anymore. All bridges and tunnels leading to Manhattan were closed by the authorities. During all this, I was trying to get hold of my wife over the phone. She had only just realized the catastrophe when she reached her desk at the building where she worked in Midtown Manhattan. and we decided that she must get to a safer spot and walk home to her parents who lived some blocks from her work. Then we would see what happened. We didn't know if the attack was over or if more was to come, but she would probably be more safe in a lower building. I had no idea when or if I would ever see her again. My sister-in-law worked in a building right across from the Twin Towers, and she was 7 months pregnant. Later in the evening, we found out that my sister-in-law, along with thousands of others, had been evacuated to the southernmost tip of Manhattan, later to be sent north by foot. We didn't lose anyone, family members, friends, or colleagues, but we only knew this days after. As the day progressed, the situation became even worse. First, the South Tower collapsed at 9:28 a.m., and then at 10:03 a.m., the North Tower. Everything was complete chaos. We had no idea how many people had perished, but it must be in the thousands. Some media speculated that the number could have exceeded 20,000, perhaps up to 40,000. But nobody had any real idea of the number of casualties, dead or wounded. At some point, we were told that the hospitals needed blood donors, a lot of blood donors. So people flocked to the hospitals in Manhattan, north of the attack, to give blood. But then later in the afternoon, the call for blood donors was retracted. The hospitals did not need any more blood donors. And they didn't need people coming in with missing relatives, coming in to hand in hairbrushes or toothbrushes for DNA identification. They didn't say why, but I guess the reason, they did not think that those still in the towers during the collapses could be identified at all. And this turned out to be correct for most victims. Of the about 2,500 dead at Ground Zero, as the area was quickly named, only about 1,100 would ever be identified. There was not a shred of physical evidence left of the other 1,400. Around midday, I began to have problems getting a phone connection, but I did manage to reach Denmark and leave a message that we were okay, at least for the time being. After midday, I got a phone call through to my wife. She and her sister were safe at their parents' place, and we talked about when they could get back to Queens. The earliest would be when the bridges and tunnels were opened again, and when evening came, it finally looked as if the attack was over. The authorities had evacuated the lower half of Manhattan, but opened the bridges and tunnels so people could get away from the island. But it took many hours to move that many people. September 11 had become September 12 before my wife, her sister, and other family members were back home. Even if we were all exhausted, we did not get much sleep. Nobody went to work the next day. We stayed at home, just sitting in the sofa. We didn't talk much, but we watched television where they showed the attack again and again, discussing all kinds of scenarios. We knew that we would never forget that day.
Thanks for sharing, Claus. Soon after the terror attack on September 11, a grassroots movement began to emerge called the Truth Movement. As the years have passed, this movement has made many speculative claims and theories about the tragic event. The movement does not have a centralized organization behind it. Instead, it consists of many groups with wildly different arguments and claims. The groups are often very hostile towards each other and always towards any critics such as Claus and myself. The movement can in reality only agree on one thing, that the official account is a deliberate hoax. The goal of the movement is to uncover what the movement considers the true account of the terror attack. The primary claim is that Osama bin Laden and Qaeda were not behind the attack. Instead, it was the US government which had meticulously planned all events during the terror attack against its own population. Buildings of strategic importance were supposedly destroyed by controlled demolitions. The Pentagon was hit by a cruise missile. The fourth plane, Flight 93, was shot down. All 4 planes were allegedly remotely controlled. There were no planes involved at all, is also a claim. Later, important information was supposedly destroyed so not to incriminate the real culprits. So, let's take a look at some of these conspiracy theories, because that's what Claus and I do. We should first know know the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy is when two or more people agree on a secret plan. This plan must involve illegal, immoral, and/or harmful actions. A conspiracy theory is the claim of a conspiracy. So, to put it shortly, there's evidence of a conspiracy. There's no evidence of a conspiracy theory. We have picked 6 of the most popular claims, concentrating on the destruction of the World Trade Center. Keep in mind that it will be a quick and dirty walkthrough. It can often take hours to explain thoroughly why a specific conspiracy theory isn't true. You can find more complete explanations on our site 911facts.dk.
Let's take the first one. Steel-framed high-rises cannot collapse due to ordinary office fires. Now, the World Trade Center consisted of 7 buildings. All were destroyed in the disaster, but the collapse of the Twin Towers were spectacular events, and it does sound mysterious. How can steel-framed high-rises collapse due to ordinary office fires? Well, ordinary office fires start typically with someone throwing a cigarette butt in a paper basket or an electronic device short circuits. Ordinary office fires start in one place and spread out. Ordinary office fires do not start with commercial air passenger planes hitting 400+ meter tall skyscrapers, or, as is the case with World Trade Center 7, debris weighing many tons smashing into the facade, starting fires on several floors. Ordinary office fires are also put out by firefighters, or at least attempted to. In none of the buildings in the World Trade Center complex could the fires be put out. It simply wasn't possible, partly due to the height of the Twin Towers and part because the water supply was being cut off. The official investigations by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology concluded that the World Trade Center 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, and World Trade Center 7 collapsed due to fires. The fires in the Twin Towers were due to the planes hitting them, and the fires in the World Trade Center 7 were due to the damages from the collapsing World North Tower. So the claim is simply false. It's based on an assumption that is not true.
Another claim is that witnesses heard explosions, which must prove controlled demolitions. Photos and videos of the Twin Towers show isolated dust clouds emerging from several floors below the collapse front. Conspiracy theorists claim that these dust clouds are created by explosives, and thus the buildings must have been destroyed by controlled demolitions. A building consists mainly of air, and when a building collapses, all that air is pressed together. But that's not easily done. Air escapes through whatever openings it can find. And if no such openings are found, enough pressure will smash through the weaker parts of the building, usually the windows. The pressure also travels down through the building faster than the building collapses. It's just like a bicycle pump. The dust clouds are not created by explosives, but by escaping air. So, again, the claim is false, and it's just based on a misunderstanding of how the laws of physics work.
Third one, more than 100 witnesses supposedly heard explosions and saw flickers of light, and this is claimed to be evidence of controlled demolitions. And there's a grain of truth to this, because some people actually did hear explosions and saw flickers of light. But there are many other possible explanations than explosives. It could be pressurized containers, it could be computer monitors. In those days, we had these big CRT monitors, not flat screens as we have today. It could be car tires, it could be fuel tanks. There were many cars that burned in the chaos. And what's even more important, controlled demolitions are recognizable by rhythmical explosions. But we cannot find any recordings of rhythmical explosions when the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 collapsed. So the claim leaves out the necessary, the rhythmic booms. Without booms, no explosives. Without explosives, no controlled demolition.
This next one will be a bit technical. One of the most popular, if not the most popular claim, is that there was nanothermite placed in the buildings. Well, thermite is, apart from being an insect, the term for a mix of oxidized iron, or rust, and aluminum powder. It burns at very high temperatures and can melt steel. It has been used for more than a century to weld railroad tracks. Nanothermite is a version of thermite where the particles are nanosized, very small, which makes the reaction far more powerful. One of the leaders of the truth movement, Danish professor emeritus Niels Harrit, has together with some American colleagues from the truth movement published a report of the alleged finding. Alas, facts are relentless. There's no sign of nanothermite. When we read the report, it becomes clear that there's no positive identification of nanothermite. In other words, Niels Harrit has found something in the dust which he believes to be nanothermite, but he hasn't got any nanothermite to compare his findings to. Niels Harrit simply doesn't know what the nanothermite is supposed to consist of. When we confronted Niels Harrit with this fact, he claimed that it's a special type of nanothermite, which can only come from a military laboratory. But you cannot prove a claim with another claim. So the claim is simply not true.
Witnesses claim that pools of molten steel could be seen at ground zero for weeks after the attack. The fires in the buildings were not hot enough to melt steel, but nanothermite can. Ergo, molten steel must be caused by nanothermite. Now, the claim stems mainly from this photo taken at ground zero during the cleanup. It's argued that the yellow lights look like the light from glowing and molten steel. But it turns out that the photo has been photoshopped. This is the original photo. And now it's obvious that the light comes from spotlights because the rescue team is looking for survivors, or rather human remains. Had it been molten steel, the people in the photo would have suffered severe burns. So the claim is primarily based on a forgery.
It has never happened before that a steel-framed high-rise has collapsed due to fire. Therefore, it cannot happen. Therefore, the official account must be false. But I have never broken my leg before either. And because it has never happened before, it cannot happen that I break my leg. But that is just a nonsense claim. All events have a first time. All events happen for the first time at some time. So this claim, which we hear very often actually, is simply just based on pure nonsense.
We are nearing the end of our lecture. So we round off with a quick overview of our approach to conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. We have chosen two major avenues. One, we research conspiracy theories and the people who believe in them. We investigate conspiracy claims, not to debunk them, but to see if they are true or not. Some of the theories could be true. And we apply critical thinking and scientific methodology to the claims. We have an open mind, but not so open that our brains fall out. We also try to find explanations as to why conspiracy theories emerge, who believe in them, and why they do it. And we found some effective ways of dealing with conspiracy theorists. Two, we do good old-fashioned public education. We give lectures and workshops about conspiracy theories, and we appear in the media as experts on the subject. Our research is basically mapping conspiracy theories, and in particular conspiracy theorists. For instance, we have identified three major types of conspiracy theorists: the novice, the preacher, and the warrior. And we are also mapping their psychology and their worldviews, and most importantly, their methods. We work on approaches on how to handle conspiracy theorists. We have developed a method for investigating what they believe, and we are studying why they believe, because only then can we begin to propose strategies and tactics on how to counter their beliefs. We've debated conspiracy theories for more than a decade now and have come up with a set of methods by which we can effectively debate them. We've also developed concepts in order to better understand and explain what is happening. And we've also investigated the connection between conspiracy theories and terrorism. Some of our findings have been published in Chaos, the academic journal published by the Department of Religious History at the University of Copenhagen. The peer-reviewed article is called The Rhetorics of Conspiracy Theories. The article is in Danish and will be translated to English in the future. In 2018, we attended one of the biggest conferences for science-based skeptics, SciCon, in Las Vegas, where we gave a lecture on a finding of ours, the Heritage Syndrome, why some become evangelical conspiracy theorists. You may have heard about some of the other speakers, Stephen Fry, Richard Dawkins, Susan Blackmore, Steven Pinker, and James Randi, who sadly is no more. The conference is highly recommended to skeptics and, to be honest, anyone who's not. That concludes our talk. Over to Pontus.
Yes, thank you very much. It is fascinating to hear about this again. I mean, it's been 20 years, and I don't think about this every day, and I don't recall all of the details of how quickly it actually happened, because then we have lived with this since then, but it was actually over in a couple of hours from the attacker's point of view. It's very, very interesting. So we will now take a little break. About 10 minutes. So let's give it a little bit more. Let's say we're back at 10 minutes past 8. Well, that's Central European time if we have any foreign listeners. So 10 minutes after the hour, we will come back with the Q&A. We have had 6 questions so far. So I'm sure there are people out there that you have more questions. So go into the link here down at, well, rather it's there, at Slido/VOF, put in your questions or vote for some of the questions that are already there. And we will see you at 10 past 8. Thank you very much. All right, so thank you very much for the questions, and thank you to Claus and Steen once again. We have had quite a few questions coming in during the break here, and some of them more or less about conspiracies and interesting claims that we will try to, or not me, but they will try to counter. So the first question we have from Igor. He says, obviously, the US response on the attack was atrocious. What, in your opinion, should have been done instead?
Well, that's hindsight, and hindsight is always 20/20. Of course, the American authorities should have prevented such an attack. And they didn't. They have learned a lot from it. Many of the problems stemmed from the various departments in the intelligence communities. They didn't exchange information the way they ought to have. And, it's the usual, if you've ever worked in a big organization, you learn quickly that the various departments, they tend to keep information for themselves, because information is power also within the organization, and that prevents important information to disseminate to the right people. And that's also what these investigations into the intelligence communities showed. People didn't exchange information when they should have. So hopefully a lot has changed in the intelligence communities.
Yeah. Can I follow up on that? It could be put very simple. How do you plan for the unknown? because this was a kind of attack that we'd never seen before. So it's really difficult if you sit down now and plan for something that hasn't happened yet before. How do you make a plan for that? It's really, really difficult. And that's what they've said again and again. They knew that something was underway, something was cooking, something was coming. They had a lot of intelligence and a lot of reports that Al-Qaeda was planning something, and they knew that they were planning something big. But they didn't know when exactly, and they didn't know this kind of attack with the planes used as missiles. So it's quite impossible to plan for such a thing. I had another point with this. I forgot it. Yeah. So it's just really difficult to plan for something that has happened
also
before.
They didn't have a lot of time. It was less than an hour from each hijacking till the planes were until the attacks were a fact, and that was probably part of it. I mean, surely part of it. Okay, Igor has another question. Are conspiracy theories about this event evolving over time? Some new and exciting, weird ones, or are people just keep reciting the old debunked stuff?
Yeah, basically, it's just the. Sorry, Klaus. You can follow up. It's basically the old stuff that keeps repeating. We have, however, in the later years, seen some sort of a new generation of conspiracy theorists that repeat old conspiracy theories, but in a new version where they kind of mix them up, and they as if they actually don't know the original claim. A good example is that there was a popular claim that the plane that hit the Pentagon simply couldn't hit the Pentagon because of something they call the ground effect. They said it wasn't possible for an airplane to fly that fast and that low to hit a building. It would bounce off from the ground. That was not true because it was just a misunderstanding of how aerodynamics work. But today we see this claim in another version where they say the planes couldn't hit the buildings. And so the new generation has understood this old claim as if none of the planes could hit anything, which is, of course, even more ridiculous because if there's something that's easy, then it's hitting something with a plane.
One of the problems we think that these theories, they mutate, so to speak. It's because there's really, even though the truth movement is a movement, there's no central source for these claims. People can't visit a website where these are websites where these claims are collected, except, of course, from 9/11 Fast Decay, but they don't. Hopefully they go there, but they don't always. So for truther sites, there are no central source for these theories to maintain their purity, so to speak. That the theories, they keep popping up and they wander from. It's like urban legends. They wander from place to place on the internet, and it's like a telephone game or Chinese whispers. I don't know what you call it in Swedish, but this idea that you tell one person something, and that person tells a third person, and then a fourth person, and by the 10th person, the initial story has changed significantly. It's probably what's happening here, that the old claims, the old theories, they mutate into something completely new.
All right. So the next question is from Anonymous, and it is it realistic that a building such as the World Trade Center 7 should collapse so completely quickly after internal fires only and no significant structural damage?
Well, the question as it is put, is it realistic? Yeah, because it happened. It happened. So it's realistic. I think what the Anonymous means here is it could it really happen without just after internal fires only, and no significant structural damage. Well, the collapse, it took 7 hours between the World Trade Center 7 was hit and until it collapsed. So when we compare with the Twin Towers, they burned for 56 minutes and 102 minutes. So 7 hours burning, that's a long time. So the damage that was done to the World Trade Center 7 was extensive. It took a long time. So the collapse was, in a sense, inevitable, in a sense, because firemen had in the area, they had noticed that the building began to creak and twist and turn a little bit. So in their professional view, and they have a lot of experience with fires, the building was almost doomed to collapse at some point.
They knew it would collapse. They pulled out the crew in order to make sure that no one got hurt from debris falling. And there's also a bit of a trick in the question or misunderstanding. I don't know. Collapse so completely. Well, how does a building not crash or collapse completely? I mean, once it starts collapsing, it collapses until there's nothing, no more things that should collapse. I mean, when a building collapses, most of it normally collapses. Or, of course, sometimes part of a building could collapse. But in this instance, this building collapsed in a special way. It collapsed from the inside out. And we can see that if you watch videos, that there's a penthouse on top of the building that collapses into the building. So the interior is actually collapsed before the rest, the exterior, follows. And that makes it look like it's the whole building collapse. The last part of the collapse looks like it's the whole building collapsing, but it's actually just the last remains of the building. So, and that's why there was a report which has been peer-reviewed about this building, and engineers and architects all over the world teach from this report because they learned a lot about how buildings act in a fire. So they learned something new. It hadn't been seen before that a building could collapse just like that from fires alone.
All right. The next question is from someone in Wales. Someone in Wales, UK. So just to make sure that it's not Australia or something else. Anyway, they say, thank you. My question is very general. How do you engage people who have no understanding of the scientific method or critical thinking? No answer ever suffices, and I assume for such a person.
Well, how do you engage? That's a great question, because you have to take it step by step. And sometimes it means that you have to explain what evidence is and what it's not. What is critical thinking? How do you approach claims? A claim, for instance, has to be empirical. We have to be able to test it. A non-empirical claim would be that I can speak to aliens on a planet in another galaxy. Okay, fine, maybe, but we can't test that claim. We can test a lot of other claims, and in order for us to be scientific, a claim has to be empirical. It has to be able to be tested, and it can take a long time to carry out such a conversation. But you should never hope to convert, so to speak, a person, a conspiracy theorist, just like that. You can only lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. They have to, in order for them to change their minds, they have to start thinking themselves. So it's explaining the scientific method and critical thinking to them is maybe the first thing we have to do in order to make them stop believing these conspiracy theories. You got to make people think first.
I would like to actually pass this question to Pontus, because this is a general question. This is not just about conspiracy theories. This is about scientific method and critical thinking. I mean, you represent an organization, and your organization, just by being there, are actually doing something about this. Wouldn't you?
We're trying to do that. I mean, the last part of our name is Folkbildning, which means popular education, trying to educate people. And we do even contact, and we have, I've spoken to members of the Swedish Parliament about the importance of teaching critical thinking and scientific method in schools, even from a very early age, I think. You don't wait until it's time for university, but by then it may be too late, if you will. You have to learn this very, very early. And I think that even rather small children can understand this if you use a proper language. Don't use too scientific words, but you can teach them how to test things. How can we test this? How can we know that we are not fooling ourselves? That kind of questions about simple things. So,
Exactly. I love that answer. And to the question, I would say, do more or less the same thing, because if someone being an adult or a child, it doesn't matter if you haven't been exposed to critical thinking or scientific method, then you just start from scratch, as if it was a child that had to learn this for the first time. I sometimes entertain children with songs, and I have a show that says "Don't believe anything." And I use fun and satire and a lot of magic for children to provoke their critical thinking and to make them have the experience that they can be fooled. So there are various ways of attacking this problem.
Okay, back to our friend Igor. He has another question. Are conspiracy theorists stalking you for your work at debunking them? Do you have stories about weird stalkers you are willing to share? So I guess you get in contact with a lot of people who do not agree with you, to put it politely.
Actually, it was a surprise to us how conspiracy theorists seem to react to our presence in the world and on the internet. We thought that they would be very aggressive and just leave us. But instead, we see an interesting pattern. We have long debates with conspiracy theorists, and very often they get quite angry, and they end discussions saying, "I'm never going to talk to you again," or "You are not worthy of debating." And then they leave the discussion, but they always come back. And that's a strange pattern that took us quite by surprise when we realized that many of them come back. I wouldn't say they stalk us, because they are very welcome to come and have a discussion. And actually, we've had a few threats, a few death threats, but not many, which we hope is due to our approach, which is always extremely polite.
Insultingly so.
Insultingly so.
Insultingly polite.
But they have this pattern of this repetitive pattern of coming back to us, either continuing an ongoing discussion or just starting a new subject, as if they had not dismissed us in the first place.
Okay. So another question that I almost missed, because people are still voting, so it popped up above some of the ones that we've already asked. This is from John, who asks, has any popular conspiracy theory ever been found to be true?
Ooh, yes. That's a good one.
Yeah. Yes. Because all conspiracies are, in a way, conspiracy theories that have been found to be true. So, I mean, you can't really have an event today without conspiracy theories popping up. And once in a while, the conspiracy theorists get it right. Even a blind chicken can find a corn. So if a conspiracy is unearthed and unveiled usually by the media, Yeah, you can say that a conspiracy theory has been found to be true. So,
however, that contradicts what we said in the beginning. So now I'm being a little critical towards your explanation, Klaus, and I will go into details. Because we said in the beginning that a conspiracy has evidence, but a conspiracy theory has no evidence. So how could a conspiracy theory ever be true? Well, in fact, to go into details, a conspiracy theory is actually never true. But we have to take another starting point. Because once you see something that is strange or unexplained, it's sound and perfectly all right that you have some suspicion. But the point is what you do with the suspicion. And that's the critical time. That's the critical point. If you have a suspicion, which the police might have if they suspect something criminal has taken place, then it's all right to have this suspicion. But if you cannot find any evidence to confirm this suspicion, then you have to put aside your suspicion. Then you have to leave it. Because if you keep it, if you are still suspicious without evidence, then it becomes a conspiracy theory. On the other hand, if your suspicion is confirmed by evidence, well, then it changes into even more suspicion, or in the end, it becomes a conspiracy or a crime or anything true. So the difference is the evidence.
Here's another question I think is very interesting that I hope I don't interpret too much into. This is from Philip, and he asks, have you ever met a 9/11 truther that wasn't prone to believe in other conspiracy theories? And I think I know where he's coming from, and that is that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, you seem to believe in a lot of them, if not all of them.
Yeah, we're always looking at the research being done. I mean, until 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of academic interest in conspiracy theories, but that has certainly changed in the past 20 years. And there are studies coming out almost weekly now. They don't paint a very clear picture as it is, but it's still early days as a field of study. So we shouldn't be too concerned with that. But one of the things that seem to gain traction is motivated reasoning. Is that when you believe in one theory, when you tend to believe in one or more, and that has probably something to do with the fact that you have lowered your standard of evidence sufficiently so that when you hear of one and believe in it, well, then you are more prone to believe in the next and the next and the next. So I don't think we have ever met a truther who did not also believe in other conspiracy theories.
Not a truther, but we have our own investigation or research shows that there are several types of conspiracy theorists. Yeah. And to put it short, we have three types, type 1, 2, and 3. Type 1 is the kind of conspiracy theorist that is close to the uncle at the dinner table having this urban legend that he tells, but he doesn't really go into it. It's not part of his life. It doesn't change his life. He's just passing it on for entertainment or for fun. Something like, have you heard there was never any people landing on the moon? Something like that. Sometimes this type 1 conspiracy theorist only believes in one conspiracy theory because he hardly believes itself, because you could also, with sound arguments and evidence, convince him otherwise. But once you move on to type 2 and type 3 conspiracy theorists, and we can take that another time, then it's true what Klaus says, then they always believe in more conspiracy theories.
Speaking of uncles, this was this was more of a joke, but I'll read it anyway. Your crazy uncle asks, if 9/11 wasn't an inside job, why are there still monkeys? Oh, sorry, wrong conspiracy. I said, that's funny. I like that. I like that.
Give it time.
Yeah,
Give
right.
it time.
So if you don't get it, you could Google evolution, I believe. Okay.
Yes.
Then we have another anonymous question. Images of Pentagon after impact visually contradicts an airplane being the impact object. Well, that's a bold claim. Okay. There are windows intact and the hole, quote unquote, is way too small. Explain, question mark.
Let's take the last one first. The hole is way too small. The question, the fellow here doesn't show us any images, but I'm betting that the hole he's talking about is the hole inside the Pentagon is 5-sided, hence the name, but it consists of it's not rings, but it's rings. Sorry?
5 rings.
5 rings. No, 3 rings in 5 sides. Yeah.
5.
And Flight 77 went through the first ring and penetrated a little bit on the other side. And that's the hole that is way too small. That's true. It's too small for a plane, but it's not too small for the debris that was pressed through the building.
So you're talking about the exit hole.
It's actually the exit hole, not the
the entry
input hole. Yeah.
Sometimes they also have this claim for the entry hole, but it's a bit because it's so difficult to distinguish what actually happened on the facade, because the building crashed a little later. But there are actually pictures taken from just after the impact. And if you put those pictures together, you can actually see the sign of a plane hitting. There's a hole that fits with the body of the plane, and then there are damages on the wall from pretty clear damages from the wings.
But what we shouldn't expect is a silhouette like we see in the cartoons, with the Wile E. Coyote going through a rock, and then it's just his silhouette. Because planes, while they are very strong in the air, they are they're not very sturdy. They don't have a lot of mass. So when they collide with a solid object, as the Pentagon was, it goes through the building, the first ring, and we can find almost all of the passengers. Their remains were found inside the building. So if you don't believe that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, then you must now explain why the bodies of the passengers were found inside the building. That is very, very strong evidence that the flight hit and penetrated the Pentagon.
Okay, so now we have a picture to show, and I will show it very, very shortly. But once I press on the button, you probably won't hear me. So I will ask the question first. This image needs explanation! Exclamation point. And this is put by Anonymous. Absolutely excludes an airplane as the culprit! Exclamation point. And now I will show you what I mean. There you go.
The picture show. Okay. The picture shows the Pentagon after a part of the building has collapsed on top of the penetrating plane. So it's not possible to see anymore where the plane entered the building. On the photos that we can, were taken before that section collapsed, you can actually see entry holes for the fuselage and some of the wings. So this photo is taken after the building has collapsed on top of the entry hole, so to speak. So it's I can understand why it's difficult to see. Yeah, sure, there's no evidence of a plane. No, because most of the plane is inside the building, and the building has collapsed on top of it. So Yeah, there's no entry hole left.
Okay, I'm back here. I hope they will accept that explanation. Yeah.
I hope so too. I wish I could see the picture. Somehow I can't.
Okay.
But
are there
more?
Okay. No, that's the only one. This was just a conspiracy for you, Sten. So, right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Tobias asks, how are recordings of the airplanes flying to the World Trade Center explained away by conspiracy theorists?
They have a couple of really interesting theories. The most sublime, in my view, is that all footage of the planes hitting the Twin Towers is, in fact, computer-generated images. And keep in mind that this is 2001, where it was definitely not that wasn't possible at the time. It may be possible today, but you would still need a lot of computing power, and you would still need to collect all the amateurs on the street who also filmed at least the second plane hitting the South Tower. You had to get that footage and run it through a computer, removing or putting the planes in order to get that conspiracy theory to be true. So computer-generated planes were magically inserted in all these movie cameras, not just from the news outlets, but also from people on the streets.
But that also... sorry, if I may butt in a bit.
It's not only the planes that conspiracy theorists try to explain away in that fashion that Claus just explained, but they also explain away the people on the streets and the people in the towers. They claim that they were all what they call crisis actors, which is, an impossible task to imagine. I mean, it would be thousands, if not millions, of people that would have to keep this a secret still after 20 years, and not one revealing it. I can't imagine how that would ever be possible. That's overwhelmingly. But
we always use the example of Bill Clinton when he was president. Let's just say that this is not safe for work. I should say that. Monica Lewinsky went down in history for going down on Bill Clinton. And when Bill Clinton was president, he was the most powerful man on the planet, and he can't even get an honest, or rather not so honest, blowjob in private without the whole world knowing. How on earth can just 1,000 people keep a secret? They can't. I mean, it's simply not possible. Some of the people, they're gonna. It's 20 years have passed, and some of them have died a natural death. There hasn't been a single deathbed confession from any of these implicated people. I mean, come on, you can't keep a secret like that. It's not realistic to do that. So,
right. Yeah. Are you up for a few more questions, or?
Sure. All right. Oh, yeah, sure.
So, Animal Anonymous asks, in your opinion, what are the best ways to battle the creation and spread of conspiracy theories or pseudoscience in the future? Well, actually, I would say we need them now, but I can see the point.
Yeah. Should I take that, Claus?
Yeah.
I normally say that there are three ways of going on about it. First of all, the spread of conspiracy theories has taken a giant leap after the invention of internet. Actually, the spread has always been there, but it has just been sped up by the internet, so it happens very fast. So obviously, a good way of attacking it would be to have the same standards at the internet, especially on social media, as you have on regular traditional media. That you have to be that you edit what is on. This might be a difficult task, but it's actually already happening. I mean, both Facebook and YouTube and several others have started editing a lot of what is presented on their media during this corona pandemic. And they might as well do the same with conspiracy theories, because why should the standard be lower on a media that's just because it's electronic or because it's on the internet? Because Facebook is a private enterprise, so they could have their standards as well as any newspaper. So that was one thing, some kind of editing of social media. Another thing could be to crave some higher standards of the regular media, journalists and so on. It has become very popular in many media, especially at least in Denmark, that to present conspiracy theorists because they have so dramatic stories, but they get presented without being opposed and without getting critical questions. And I am of the opinion that if you claim something which is really far out, really crazy, then you should there should be a journalist opposing you cleverly. But that can only be done if the journalist is well prepared. And in many popular shows, journalists are not are not trained into asking critical questions. So that would be a second thing. A third thing would be what we've already talked about, teaching critical thinking in public schools.
Whatever we have to do, it must be done really, really fast, because you got to nip it in the bud. It doesn't ensure that a conspiracy theory will not be spread, but as early as you can, get in there and get some sound evidence out, so at people, when they hear about the conspiracy theory, they will also have the opposing evidence against it, so they can better gauge how the validity of the claim. Because all too often, people only meet the conspiracy theory. They rarely meet the opposite story.
All right. Okay. Few more questions.
Yeah, shoot.
Anonymous asks, I've heard that Osama bin Laden's family had been flown out of the US shortly before or after the attack. What was that about?
That's a story that's actually true. It was not very popular to have the last name of bin Laden right after 9/11. It was very unpopular. So the bin Laden family is big, and there were some members of the family in the US, and they were quickly they had figured out that they better contact the authorities, because having a name like that could pose some threat. So the authorities got them rounded up, if you like. They also asked them about Osama bin Laden. As we told in the lecture, his family had cut him off a long time ago, so the family members had no connection to Osama bin Laden. And even though on September 11, all civilian airplanes were grounded, and that was only lifted on September the 14th. And on the 14th, members of the bin Laden family were flown out to, I think it was Saudi Arabia, for their own safety after they had been interrogated by the authorities. So it was simply, get out.
So it was after the attacks. It wasn't. If it had been before, it would have been suspicious, I guess. Yeah.
Ooh,
it would have been suspicious, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah. Maybe not, because they were suspecting Al Qaeda to do an attack, and Osama bin Laden was already wanted by the FBI He was wanted. Actually, there was quite a big reward for him because they had already attacked the United States on land and at sea, as we also explained, and then this attack came from the air. So they might. There could have been reasons to protect people with that shared his name.
I mean, even today, 20 years later, that surname is not very popular in many places on this planet. So it's understandable that the American authorities did that.
Yeah. Right. The next one from Philippe is about believing in many conspiracies, but I think we already answered that in a way above. So let's skip that.
Yeah.
And then we have some more conspiracy like question here from Anonymous. You might come to that. I don't know really what that means, but is it possible that the 4 planes was shot down by the U.S. Air Force? I think you almost answered that in your lecture before.
The fourth or the
all four
planes?
The 4 plane.
Or the fourth plane. It could be the 4th plane. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's not. Because if it was shut down, that would actually be a good thing. Remember that when Flight 93 were still in the air, the White House had realized that the planes were being used as suicide missiles. So if Flight 93 or other planes were hijacked, it would pretty much be a given thing that they would also be used as suicide missiles. So should you shoot them down? Well, they didn't have there was no order to shoot them down because, I mean, we are talking about murder of American citizens. So that's not an easy decision to make. But even so, let's just assume that Flight 93 was shot down by the U.S. Air Force. That would have been a good thing because they would have prevented the plane from hitting its target, which was probably either the White House in Washington, D.C., or Capitol, the big round domed building in Washington that houses the two houses. So I mean, if the 4th plane had hit the Capitol, that would have been even more disaster than shooting it down.
But I'm sorry, but you're not really answering the question. So if I may, here, because as I understand the question, he asks, is it possible that the 4th plane could have been shot down? But you're more answering what the consequence would have been if it was not shut down.
Yeah.
No, it's. If we look at the evidence, there's nothing that point in the direction that it was shut down. If it was shut down, the debris would have been spread in quite another way. It would have hit the ground in quite another way if it had been shut down. There would have been so many other kinds of evidence that would point in that direction. Nothing points in that direction. And actually, I can't remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Claus, but there was given an order to shoot down planes, but it came too late for the fighter planes to reach these planes. They had difficulty finding it, and it's a matter of time. Everything happened, as we talked about, quite fast. So had this prolonged a bit, let's say 30 minutes, an hour, they would have had to make the decision whether to shoot at least 1 or 2 of the planes down, because they at least Flight 93, they would have to consider to shoot it down because the fighter planes would have reached it. However, but the simple answer is the evidence on the ground. The debris would have been scattered in the completely other way.
Very different from
very different.
All right, then we have the killer question, the one last question, saying that you criticize conspiracy theorists, often quite justifiable, it says, but you yourselves are equally biased, but on the other official direction. Sure. What is your excuse?
Sure. In one word, evidence. Yeah. All existing evidence points to the official account being correct. And furthermore, there's no evidence that points to any other explanation. There's conspiracy theories about 9/11. They are not based on evidence, and they're not coherent. They include all kinds of unanswered questions. There are a good conspiracy theory poses more questions than it answers. Because go on.
To follow up, I mean, there is actually no no other explanation that challenges the official explanation. And the problem is that conspiracy theories are fragmented. So the only other kind of alternative explanation is a lot of fragments that cannot be put together. And you have to have a coherent, logically based explanation or narrative where you can start from scratch and say what happened with the first plane and what happened with the last event in this. You have to have a chain of event. And so far, we have asked everyone who criticizes or with reason says that we are biased. Okay, come on, start your explanation, your alternative explanation. What happened with Flight 11? Just start there. And people never answer because there is no other explanation. And that's a very good way to test it. You need to be able to explain what has been going on, and you have to apply evidence to every step in your explanation. And so far, that just hasn't been possible. But of course, we are ready to accept another explanation once this can be done, and once you can get either the existing evidence or to point in that direction, or you can somehow explain away the existing evidence and apply other evidence to the new. And this is actually ridiculous, especially with 9/11, because as we mentioned during the lecture, 9/11 is probably the single event in history that has most evidence to it, mainly because it happened in front of cameras. Part of it happened, we were all watching it. So there were so many cameras pointing onto the attack and onto the catastrophe. I mean, if it's not impossible, it's really hard to find other terrorist attacks and other events that has so many cameras and has so many evidence being presented as it unfolds. And afterwards, the government has released much more evidence about this event than they would normally do in any crime. I mean, you can actually find photographs of bodies. I mean, you would never see the police or any investigation team release photos of dead bodies, of dead people. But in this instance, they have. So I can understand that you suspect many events throughout history, but this is probably the most ridiculous event to suspect because it has more. It has almost more evidence than the theory of evolution.
Oh, let's not start that discussion right there. There are still monkeys. Can you explain that? No, don't do that. We'll do that in another show, or another episode. So, thank you very much, Claus and Steen. It's been fascinating. Thank you for your time, for your research, and for how much time you took tonight to answer all the questions. I think some of them for the 100th or the 1000th time. But we have to be, keep answering these questions because they're still being put. So I'm going to be rude now and switch you away. There you go. And I want to thank the audience for listening to us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Well, enjoyed it. It's a very serious subject, but it's very interesting to hear it. I myself needed to be reminded of what actually happened because it was such a long time ago, and very soon people will start to forget it. And when people do forget, that is there's no potential to bring up alternative theories and ideas and such on. So we need to remind ourselves what happened, and it was very interesting. And thank you for tuning in to VOF, the Swedish Skeptics. We are coming back with similar events in the future. We haven't got anything planned exactly right now, but we have some leads, and you can follow what we do at vof.se. That's the website that we have, and we will publish more information there, and also on our Facebook page and on Twitter. So, but for tonight, thank you very much, and thanks again to Claus and Steen for their fantastic work, and we will see you next time.